Earth's silence was never surrender. The Council learned that too late. The Frontier Repository did not burn quietly. In the vacuum above the Red Star's rim, it burned without a sound at all. Commander Alistair Vance was still at his station when the feed cut. One moment the sensors showed the orbital platform, 22 decks of cataloged human engineering work, 80 years of it, and the next moment the screen held nothing but a clean gray field and a single blinking cursor where the station's registry signature had been. He did not look away from it. He set his tally counter on the console beside his right hand and clicked it once for the platform. Then he closed the feed. The Alabaster Amphitheater was already in session. Grand Exarch Thuljan stood at the center of the lower tier, his 4 primary limbs folded in the relaxed posture of a being who had already decided how the morning would end. The polished copper plating across his chest caught the council light and threw small reflections across the crystalline walls. When he moved, the secondary plates at his jaw clicked softly, a rhythm the delegation translators had long since learned to read as amusement. 11 flags lined the gallery railing above him. 3 were human-aligned, 8 were not. He had counted them himself earlier that morning before the session began. The math was not difficult. The charge read into the record was permissible frontier recovery. The legal reference was from the 3rd Charter Century, an article that had not been cited in living memory because the conditions it described, an unguarded, commercially unregistered research installation within a contested development corridor, had not existed in living memory. Until now. Councillor Valeshore, seated at the Elders' bench on the amphitheater's upper ring, read the article twice before the session formally opened. Then he read it a 3rd time. The language was precise. The precedent was real. He could find no procedural flaw in the filing. That was what troubled him. "The delegation from Earth is recognized," said the session chair. Commander Vance walked to the floor alone. No aide, no legal counsel beside him. He wore the faded charcoal uniform with the silver thread running along the left shoulder, the logistics branch insignia, not a combat designation. His hands were at his sides. He did not blink when he looked up at the 11 flags. He said 4 words. "We received the signal." Then he walked back to the gallery bench and sat down. Valeshore's secondary optical membranes contracted once, fast, before he could stop them. Around him, 2 other council elders exchanged a look he could not read. The session chair waited a full 17 seconds for Commander Vance to continue. He did not. The chair cleared his throat, noted the response for the record, and called for the vote. 11 in favor, 3 against. The acquisition of the Frontier Repository, its contents, its physical wreckage, its registered coordinates, and all derivative intellectual assets, was declared lawful recovery under the 3rd Charter's provisions for commercially unregistered frontier installations. Grand Exarch Thuljan's secondary mandibles clicked in a fast, satisfied rhythm as the tally finalized on the central pillar. He did not look at Commander Vance. He did not think he needed to. What did humanity say after the vote? Keep listening. The silence is the answer. 6 hours after the session closed, Earth transmitted a single automated text log to the shared network. 5 words, plain syntax, no encryption flag. Acknowledged, returning to standard operations. Then the human comms channel dropped to 0 decibels. Not reduced, not routed through a secondary relay, 0. Valeshore was still at his terminal in the Elder Archive when his monitoring system flagged it. He pulled the channel report twice, thinking it was a relay fault. The channel was not faulted. Every human frequency, diplomatic, commercial, scientific, emergency, had simply gone still at the same moment, as cleanly as if a hand had thrown a single switch somewhere. He sat with that for a long time. 3 days after the silence began, Grand Exarch Thuljan summoned his intelligence chief to the private deck of his command hull, and displayed the contents of a data core his field teams had pulled from the repository's auxiliary network before the bombardment. The core held production logs, infrastructure records, and registered fleet tonnage reports for every human-affiliated shipyard within 40 light hours of the frontier corridor. "Show me the engineering threshold," Thuljan said. The numbers were low, lower in fact than they had been 12 years ago. The human industrial base, as logged in the shared network, had contracted significantly over the past decade. Fewer active shipyard registries, lower output tonnage, a reduced materials processing footprint. Thuljan's secondary mandibles clicked. "They have been in decline," he said. "This changes the timeline on sectors 14 through 19. We move the anchorage fleet to the Council's neutral zone within the month." He turned away from the display. "They will file a formal appeal eventually. By the time they do, our position will be structural." His intelligence chief said nothing for a moment. Then, "The silence concerns me, Exarch." "Grief concerns you," Thuljan said. "That is what it is. They are grieving." He dismissed her and went to his meal. Counselor Valeshore did not go to his meal. He went to the archive. The Sunder League's record system held cross-reference data going back 4 centuries, trade route anomalies, frequency disruptions, unexplained hull density readings from the outer rim. Valeshore had spent 30 years building a personal index of patterns in that data, the kind of patterns that only resolved into meaning when you looked at them from enough distance. He searched for human silence. He found it twice before. Once during what the human calendars called the Rim Incursion Period, 90 years prior. Once during a disputed resource corridor arbitration 40 years after that. Both times, humanity had gone quiet, no diplomatic traffic, no commercial chatter, no academic exchange postings. Both times, the silence had lasted between 11 and 22 days. Both times when they came back, something had changed. He pulled the frequency logs from both periods and set them side by side. The patterns were nearly identical. The silence was not random. It had a shape. It started clean and stayed clean, no leaks, no accidental transmissions, no junior clerk posting a supply order on the wrong channel. That kind of clean didn't happen by accident. It required infrastructure. The kind of infrastructure you had to build before you needed it. On the 7th day of the silence, a routine mass sensor ping from the Sector 12 monitoring buoy returned an anomaly. The buoy's primary function was to log transit signatures, ships entering or leaving the void lane that ran along the outer rim of the neutral zone. The log was checked by automated system every 6 hours and forwarded to whichever council member held the rotation for border monitoring. That rotation happened to belong to Valeshore. The log entry was flagged with a standard anomaly code, mass displacement detected, source unconfirmed. The system had registered a brief gravitational shadow, the kind of reading a large object produced when it dropped out of a transit lane faster than the sensor could resolve a hull profile. The shadow had lasted 0.4 seconds. Then it was gone. Valeshore read the entry 3 times. He looked at the coordinates. They were in a region the charts listed as empty, a stretch of the void well between the outer transit lanes and the deep rim, 60 light minutes from the Aegis Gate anchorage. No registered traffic used that corridor. There were no stations there, no resource platforms, no relay buoys beyond the monitoring unit itself. He flagged the report and sent it to Grand Exarch Thuljan's office with a single attached line. "I recommend we verify this reading before proceeding with the anchorage repositioning." The response came back in under 2 hours. The Exarch's administrative aide returned the report marked routine anomaly, no action required, with a footnote citing the age of the Sector 12 buoy sensor array and a recommendation to submit a maintenance ticket. Valeshore filed the response in the same folder as the silence pattern data. He opened a new file and started taking notes. On day 12, He requested a private meeting with the Exarch. Thuljan received him in the copper-paneled meeting room off the amphitheater's lower corridor, still wearing his polished ceremonial plating from that afternoon's session. He was in good spirits. The Anchorage fleet had completed its repositioning without incident. The Hegemony's legal team had already begun preliminary filings on 2 additional frontier installations in the same corridor. "What troubles you, counselor?" Thuljan asked. He picked up a small crystalline serving piece from the side table, turned it over in one of his secondary limbs, and set it back down. A habitual gesture, the kind of being made when they already knew what the conversation was going to be and had decided how it ended. Valeshore set a single page on the table, his own handwriting. 3 columns. The first rim incursion silence pattern, the disputed corridor silence, the current blackout. Duration, frequency profile, cleanliness of the cut. "Your database is immaculate, Exarch," Valeshore said. "It is simply written for an adversary that changed its skin 20 winters ago." Thuljan looked at the page, then he looked at Valeshore. "They have a stolen data core we pulled from the repository," he said. "I have reviewed it personally. Their registered shipyard output is insufficient to threaten the Anchorage fleet by a factor of 11. This silence is grief. A species that has just lost its primary archive does not mount a military response. It mourns." "With respect," Valeshore said, "you are describing what the data core shows. I am asking what it doesn't." Thuljan's secondary mandibles clicked once, not the fast, amused rhythm. Slower. "What would you have me do?" "Delay the secondary filings. Run an independent scan of the Sector 12 void well. Give me 48 hours to verify the anomaly reading." The Exarch set the crystalline piece back down. He straightened. "The filings are already submitted," he said, "and I have no interest in spending council resources scanning empty space because a monitoring buoy mistook a gravitational eddy for a hull signature." He gestured toward the door, not rudely, but with the finality of a being closing a topic. "The human channel will come back on when they have exhausted their grief. We will be in a structurally superior position when it does. That is the plan." "The plan does not change." Valeshore picked up his page. He folded it along the center crease. He left. Outside in the corridor, he stood still for a moment. The amphitheater's crystalline walls caught the orbital light from the red star below and sent thin prismatic lines across the floor. He looked at them. On day 12, the human silence showed no sign of breaking. He went back to the archive. On day 14, Valeshore found the second anomaly. It was buried in a maintenance report from the D-Prim relay network, a routine signal bounce test from a junction buoy near the UIT boundary. The test had returned a clean result, which was normal. What was not normal was the timestamp. The relay had processed the test signal 0.003 seconds faster than its rated capacity allowed. A fraction of a second. The kind of variance a system generated when its fiber load was reduced, when something that had been drawing from the relay's bandwidth for a long time had simply stopped. Valeshore sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the archive room. A relay junction drew faster when a long-term signal load was removed from it. Something had been running on that relay, quietly, steadily, for a long time, and had gone dark at the same moment Earth cut its comms. The relay had briefly sped up in the absence of the load. He pulled the junction's maintenance history going back 10 years. The variance had been there the entire time, buried in baseline drift data. A consistent 0.003-second lag across the relay's rated performance. So small it had never triggered a fault flag. So consistent it had never looked like an error. It looked like background noise. It was not background noise. Valeshore wrote a single word in his notes and underlined it twice. Infrastructure. Across the neutral zone, Grand Exarch Thuljan was reviewing the preliminary filings on the secondary frontier installations with his legal team. The session was productive. Two of the three target installations fell cleanly under the same third charter article they had used for the repository. The third required a supplemental clause, but his counsel was confident. The stolen data core sat on the side table throughout the meeting. He glanced at it once when his production analyst cited the human shipyard tonnage figures to support the timeline projections. The numbers were clear. The numbers were verified. The numbers had come from the repository's own network before the platform went dark. He did not think about the relay junction. He had not read Valeshore's report. Commander Alastair Vance was not in the amphitheater. He had not been in the amphitheater since the vote. He was aboard the logistics vessel Ashford, parked at a registered civilian anchorage 2 light towers from the council station, and he was working. The work looked mundane from the outside. Vance sat at a narrow console in the ship's operations bay, a cup of cold tea beside his right hand that he had stopped drinking somewhere around hour 3. He was cross-referencing transit schedules, civilian cargo lanes, registered relay handoffs, the maintenance windows for the neutral zone's border monitoring buoys. He clicked his tally counter once every few minutes, not counting anything visible, just keeping time. The ship's comms officer, a young woman named Priya who had learned early in this posting that silence from Commander Vance meant work was being done and not to interrupt it, sat at her own station and watched the flat line of the human frequency channel and said nothing. On the console beside Vance's cold tea, a small object caught the light when the ship adjusted its orientation. A heavy iron washer, unpolished, the zinc coat slightly worn at one edge. He had carried it since the day the repository feed went gray. He had not explained it to anyone. On day 15, Valeshore formally requested access to the Sunder League's independent sensor archive, a separate monitoring system maintained by his own delegation, older than the Council's shared network, running on different protocols. The request required 2 co-signatures from senior League members. He had them inside the hour. He ran a retroactive scan of the UIT boundary corridor, going back 8 years. The results took 6 hours to process. He waited. When the data came back, he sat in front of it for a long time without writing anything down. The scan had found mass displacement shadows. Not one. Not the single anomalous reading from the Sector 12 buoy. Hundreds. Small readings, each individually within sensor error margins, distributed across the entire DPRIM corridor over 8 years in a pattern that looked, when you plotted them all on the same chart, like nothing so much as a construction schedule. Objects moving into position, regularly, quietly, over years. Valeshore's optical membranes contracted hard and stayed that way for several seconds. The data core Thuljan had pulled from the repository showed human shipyard output in consistent decline over the same 8-year period. Fewer registered hulls, lower tonnage, a shrinking industrial footprint. He looked at the construction schedule in front of him. Then he looked at where the registered output had gone down. The numbers did not match because they were not measuring the same thing. He went to the Exarch again on day 16. This time he brought the chart. He set it on the table without preamble, a printed display showing 8 years of mass displacement shadows plotted across the UIT corridor, the pattern clear once you knew to look for it. Thuljan looked at it. His mandibles were still. "Where did you get this data?" he asked. "My own archive," Valeshore said. "Independent sensor network, different protocols from the shared grid." "And you believe these shadows represent?" "I believe the data core you retrieved from the repository was accurate," Valeshore said. "I believe it showed exactly what it was built to show. I believe it was constructed for an audience." The room was quiet. "You are suggesting a deliberate decoy," Thuljan said. "I am suggesting," Valeshore said carefully, "that a civilization does not spend 8 years reducing its visible industrial output at a consistent rate without a purpose. The decline in their registered shipyard figures is too clean. Genuine economic contraction is irregular. This is a line. Someone drew it. Thuljan stood and walked to the viewport. Below, the neutral zone's anchorage was visible, his fleet, repositioned and settled, the copper flanks of the larger hulls catching light from the system's outer star. He had 42 functional warships in that anchorage. By any registered metric, humanity could not threaten them. The Sector 12 sensors are old, he said. The Uit corridor is vast. These readings could be mineral drift, gas pockets collapsing. Over 8 years, on a construction schedule. You are building a threat from instrument noise. Valeshore picked up his chart. We didn't spend 3 generations refining our alloys, he said quietly, to ask your corporate board for a signature on our survival. He paused. That is a direct quote from a Human Engineering Guild address 30 years ago. I found it in the archive this morning. I have been thinking about it since. Thuljan turned from the viewport. For the first time in the conversation, his secondary mandibles were not clicking. They were still. What are you asking me to do, counselor? Pull back the secondary filings, Valeshore said. Open a direct channel to Commander Vance. Do it before day 19. Why 19? Valeshore did not answer that directly. Both prior silences ended between 11 and 22 days, he said. The midpoint of that range is 16.5. We are on day 16. Whatever the silence has been covering, it is close to done. He set the chart face down on the table. If I am wrong, you lose nothing. If I am right, he left it there. Thuljan looked at the chart for a long moment. Then he looked at the fleet in the viewport. 42 warships, the most capable defensive formation in this sector. His intelligence confirmed it. His data core confirmed it. You are reading ghosts into static, counselor, he said. His mandibles began their slow, amused click again. The channel will come back on when their grief runs out. We will be ready for the appeal when it does. This meeting is over. Valeshore returned to the archive. He did not go to sleep that night. He sat with his notes and the chart and the relay variance data and the historical silence patterns, and he built the picture piece by piece until the shape of it was complete in his mind. By early morning on day 17, he was not afraid of being wrong. He was afraid of being right. On the Ashford, Commander Vance finished his cross-referencing work at 3:40 ship time and filed a single encrypted dispatch on a frequency. The Council monitoring systems did not scan. An old civilian emergency band, the kind that predated the shared network by 40 years, still registered in the legacy relay tables as a weather coordination channel. The dispatch was 2 lines. The first line was a set of coordinates, the Aegis Gate anchorage, outer perimeter. The second line was a time, day 19, 600. He encrypted it, sent it, and then picked up the cold tea and drank what was left of it. He set the iron washer on the edge of the console and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his jacket pocket. Priya at her station had not turned around. Anything on the channel? Vance asked. Nothing, sir, she said. Good, he said. He stood and stretched. Log it. On day 18, the sensor array at Sector 12 flagged a new anomaly. Not a shadow this time. The buoy's mass displacement reader had gone into overflow. The system had registered a gravitational density in the void well sector that exceeded its measurement range and simply stopped counting. The alert forwarded to the Council Border Monitoring Rotation. Valeshore's name was still on the rotation. He read the alert at 2:11. He read it twice. He looked at the overflow code, which meant the buoy had encountered something it could not quantify, not because the reading was faint, but because it was too large. He opened his notes and wrote one more line under everything else. They are already there. And then, because there was nothing left to do with that information in the hours before dawn, he closed the file and waited. On day 19 at 5:53, the human comms channel opened. Not with a declaration, not with a legal filing, not with Commander Vance's voice or any voice at all. A single automated text packet arrived on the shared diplomatic frequency, addressed to the session chair and copied to all 11 delegations. Plain syntax, no encryption. Sentinel actual to Council Station, requesting outer perimeter passage clearance, Aegis Gate anchorage. Transit commencing 600. 7 minutes. Valeshore read it standing at his terminal, still in the clothes he had worn the day before. Transit, not arrival, not approach, commencing present tense, which meant. The session chair read the transit request twice, then dropped it on the floor of the amphitheater and did not pick it up. The gallery filled in 12 minutes, faster than any emergency session in Valeshore's memory. Delegations arrived still pulling on formal robes, aides half-running through the corridor arches, the crystalline walls catching the cold light of early cycle and throwing it in long white lines across the tiered seating. Grand Exarch Thuljan arrived last, his copper plating immaculate, his secondary mandibles clicking in the fast rhythm that his staff knew to stay clear of. He stood at the center of the lower tier, the same position he had occupied for the vote, and looked at the transit request on the shared display above the council pillars. Sentinel actual, outer perimeter passage, 600. Get me a sensor read on the anchorage perimeter, he said to his fleet commander, who was at his shoulder. The read came back in 40 seconds. His fleet commander said nothing. She simply turned the display toward him. The perimeter sensors showed mass displacement readings across a front that stretched from the inner transit lane to the deep void-well boundary, a distance of roughly 60 light minutes. The readings were not spikes. They were not anomalies. They were solid, dense, and continuous, distributed in a pattern that any fleet tactician would recognize in under 3 seconds. Formation hold, active. They had not just arrived. They had been there for some time, holding position, waiting for 600. At 600 exactly, the masking arrays dropped. There was no sound, because there was never sound in vacuum. What happened instead was that the sensor display in the amphitheater gallery, the shared tactical feed every delegation was watching, went from showing an empty outer perimeter to showing 23,000 hull signatures materializing simultaneously across the void-well sector. Not emerging from a transit lane, not decelerating into position, already there, already still. The numbers populated the display in a cascade that took the sensor system 4 full seconds to process and render, because the system had not been designed to handle that volume of simultaneous registration. 23,000. In the gallery, the sound was the sound of nothing, not the quiet of an empty room, the specific silence of a room full of beings who have just had the same thought at the same moment, and none of them wants to be the first to say it aloud. Thuljan looked at the display. His secondary mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. The fleet commander beside him pulled up the intelligence file, the registered human shipyard output data, the tonnage projections, the data core figures. She closed it without commenting. Valeshore was in the gallery, standing rather than seated, watching the display. He had not moved since the numbers populated. He was thinking about the relay junction, the 0.003-second variance, 8 years of consistent lag that had looked like background noise and been something else entirely. He was thinking about what it took to build 23,000 hulls without registering a single production spike on the shared network. Not a shortcut, not a stolen technology. 3 shifts a day, unmapped asteroid pockets, a parallel fiber network woven into sublight relays over 8 years. The data core Thuljan had pulled from the repository had shown declining output because the output had moved, not vanished, moved off the registered grid onto something else entirely, something that did not appear in any database the Council maintained because it had been built specifically to stay outside those databases. A second network, beneath the visible one, running on different protocols through different relays, invisible to every sensor array pointed at the right addresses. Valeshore thought of a word for it, but he did not say it yet. On the Ashford, Commander Vance watched the confirmation feed as the hull signatures registered on the shared display. Priya, at her station, read the count aloud as the system finished processing. 23,000 confirmed, she said. Her voice was level. She had known the number. She had filed the manifests herself 3 weeks ago. Saying it aloud still made something settle in her chest in a way she had not expected. Vance clicked his tally counter once. "Open a direct channel to Fleet Actual," he said. "Operation Quiet Morning, Phase 1 on my mark." He picked up the iron washer from his jacket pocket and set it on the console beside his right hand, where he could see it. "Mark," he said. Thuljan's panic scramble lasted approximately 90 seconds before his fleet commander put her hand on his secondary limb and said, quietly, "Exarch, we are in the neutral zone." He stopped. The neutral zone, Council designated. No weapons discharge permitted within its boundaries without a formal declaration of hostilities and a majority council vote. The same vote mechanism he had used to ratify the repository acquisition. His fleet was inside it. So were the 23,000 hulls now filling the sensor display. Which meant neither side could fire. Which meant the human fleet was not here to fight. He looked at the display again. 23,000 hulls in formation hold, not advancing, not targeting, holding. "What are they doing?" he said. His fleet commander had no answer. In the gallery above, Counselor Valeshore sat down slowly in his chair. He had just understood what he was looking at. Not a battle fleet, not an ultimatum backed by weapons. Something more precise than that, a demonstration, yes, but also a mechanism. The 23,000 hulls were not pointed at Thuljan's warships. They were pointed at the question of what the neutral zone rules would do, when one side had just proved the registered intelligence was fictional. He thought, they are not here to destroy anything. They are here to make the math impossible to ignore. At 6:12, Commander Vance's voice came through on the shared diplomatic frequency. The first human voice on any channel in 19 days. "Council Station, this is Sentinel Actual." The tone was the same as standing at the amphitheater floor and saying 4 words, flat, unhurried, the voice of someone who had already done the work and was now reporting results. "We are requesting formal recognition of the Ghost Grid Infrastructure Network as a registered human sovereign asset under Council Charter provisions. Ghost Grid encompasses the secondary quantum fiber relay system and associated hull production infrastructure operational in the UIT boundary corridor for the past 8 years. Full asset manifest to follow." A pause, 3 seconds. "We also note that the Iron Spire Hegemony fleet currently positioned at the Aegis Gate anchorage is operating within the neutral zone under Council jurisdiction. We are here in the same capacity. No hostile action is being initiated or planned. Operation Quiet Morning is a neutralization sequence. Non-lethal. Targeted." Another pause. "Strike Alpha launches in 4 minutes." Thuljan did not wait 4 minutes. He ordered a full scramble sequence. Every ship in the anchorage to combat-ready status, weapons systems online, engines to full drive. The order went out. His fleet commander confirmed it was received. Nothing happened. She checked the relay. The relay was active. She ran a secondary confirmation. The confirmation returned clean. The order had transmitted correctly to every ship in the anchorage. The ships had not moved. She looked at the status display. Every hull in the anchorage showed the same flag: systems, nominal, command input, received, response, null. "What does that mean?" Thuljan said. "It means," his fleet commander said carefully, "that the ships received the order and did not execute it." She ran a diagnostic. The diagnostic returned clean. The command systems are active. They are simply not, she stopped. Not what? Not responding to our authentication keys, she said. Someone has changed the system keys. Strike Alpha had taken 3 minutes and 40 seconds, not 4. Vance had been conservative with the estimate. High-intensity EMP cascades, precisely calibrated, not to rupture hulls or damage life support or harm the personnel inside, but to reach through the command layer of each ship's operating system and change every authentication credential simultaneously. The Ghost Grid's quantum fiber network had given the Sentinel fleet something the hegemony had not known existed: direct access to the shared sublight communication protocols that every warship in the anchorage used to receive orders. They had had that access for 8 years. They had simply never used it. 42 hegemony warships, every one of them fully operational, life support running, crews unharmed, every one of them incapable of executing a single command from Thuljan's bridge. In the Alabaster Amphitheater, the tactical display showed the hegemony anchorage fleet going dark, not exploding, not burning, just going still, one by one, over a span of 4 minutes, like lights turned off in a building at closing time. The gallery watched it happen in silence. At 6:21, Strike Beta launched against the VexNexus command array, the hegemony's regional coordination hub, the architecture that linked Thuljan's command authority to every military installation in the frontier corridor. The Sentinel fleet's electronic warfare units hit it with the same method: no thermal discharge, no physical breach. A network injection through the Ghost Grid's relay access, targeting the array's master authentication layer. The VexNexus went down in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Every hegemony military installation in sectors 12 through 19 lost contact with Central Command at the same moment. Not destroyed, not damaged, dark, waiting for a key that no longer worked. Vance noted the completion time in his log. Then he opened the channel to Theta Group. Theta Group, Sentinel Actual, begin civilian transit. The Theta Group rescue frigates, 41 of them, painted in the high-visibility orange of humanitarian transit operations, moved into the shipyard sectors adjacent to the now-dark Anchorage fleet. Their broadcast channels opened on every frequency, including the standard civilian emergency bands that the shipyard workers and non-combatant personnel aboard the hegemony hulls would be monitoring. The broadcast was simple: safe passage, coordinates, no conditions. Valeshore watched the rescue frigates on the gallery display and thought about what it meant to execute an operation of this precision, not just the scale of it, but the restraint of it. A civilization that could do what the Sentinel fleet had just done in 21 minutes could have done significantly more. The choice to do exactly this and nothing beyond it was itself a kind of statement. He thought about the quote he had found in the archive: "We didn't spend 3 generations refining our alloys to ask your corporate board for a signature on our survival." He understood it differently now. The alloys were not the point, the patience was. At 6:38, Grand Exarch Thuljan's fleet commander submitted a formal status report to the Council. All 42 Anchorage vessels were unresponsive to command, crew complement secure, no casualties, life support fully operational. She submitted it in her own name, not the Exarch's. Thuljan was standing at the viewport of the command room, looking at his fleet in the anchorage. 42 ships, still, dark. He had not spoken in 14 minutes. His intelligence chief, the same one who had raised concerns about the silence on day 3, was standing near the door. She did not speak either. Then Thuljan said very quietly, "The data core." "Yes," she said. "It was built for us." "Yes," she said again. He kept looking at the viewport. They built a second infrastructure system, beneath the visible one, and they built the visible one to look like exactly what we expected to see. She said nothing to that because there was nothing to say to it. It was accurate. She had suspected it on day 3 and he had told her it was grief. At 6:41, Vance's voice came back on the shared channel. Council Station, Strike Alpha and Beta complete. The Vex Nexus array is dark. Theta Group has begun civilian transit from all affected sectors. Current estimate, 2.8 million non-combatant personnel to be processed through safe corridors. A brief pause, not hesitation, the kind of pause a person made before saying something that had been prepared. We are transmitting the Ghost Grid Asset Manifest to the Council Registry now. Full documentation. 8 years of construction records, material sourcing, relay integration logs. Another pause. The manifest includes the names of the engineers who built it. Some of them were working from the Frontier Repository, the repository that the Council voted to classify as abandoned property 11 days ago. The display in the gallery updated. The Ghost Grid manifest was large. The data transfer took nearly a minute to complete. When it finished, the file size indicator sat in the corner of the display like a quiet indictment. Valeshore looked at it. Then he looked at Thuljan's empty chair at the lower tier, where the Exarch had been standing before walking out to the command room. He wrote one more line in his notes. The ledger was never incomplete. We simply refused to read what was in it. At 6:48, 48 minutes after the masking arrays dropped, Commander Vance opened a channel directly to the Council session chair, copied to all 11 delegations. "We are requesting a formal session," he said. "Today, standing agenda, Ghost Grid Asset Recognition, Repository Casualty Record and Charter Amendment Review." He paused. "We'll bring the documentation." The session chair, who had still not retrieved the dropped transit request from the floor, looked around the gallery at 11 delegations. 8 of the 11 flags had changed position in the last 40 minutes. Not removed. Turned. A small adjustment in orientation that, in the Council's formal body language, indicated a delegation was no longer in a fixed voting alignment. He looked at where Thuljan's seat was empty. "Session confirmed," he said, 2 hours. Valeshore closed his notebook. He stood. He looked at the display one more time, the Theta Group frigates moving through the shipyard sectors, the hegemony hulls dark and still, the Ghost Grid manifest sitting in the Council registry where it would stay now, permanent and undeletable. He thought they expected a formal appeal. They offered 19 days of absolute, unblinking vacuum instead. He picked up his notes and walked toward the session corridor. Behind him, the display showed the Sentinel fleet still in formation hold at the outer perimeter. 23,000 hulls, unmoving, waiting to be told the work was done. The session began without ceremony. Commander Vance walked into the Alabaster Amphitheater at 9:03 and set a single document case on the floor table at the center of the lower tier. No aide, no legal counsel, the same faded charcoal uniform, the silver thread along the left shoulder catching the Council light. He did not look at the gallery. He opened the case, removed a printed document, actual paper, the kind that could not be remotely locked or access restricted or made to disappear, and set it face down on the table. Then he poured a half cup of water from the carafe at the table's edge and did not drink it. The gallery was full, every delegation seated, the 3 human-aligned flags in their places. The 8 that had shifted orientation in the past 2 hours now angled slightly inward, a formal body language adjustment that, in the Council's record, indicated a delegation was prepared to hear new evidence. Grand Exarch Thuljan was in his seat. He had returned from the command room 18 minutes ago. His copper plating was still immaculate. His secondary mandibles were still. Valeshore sat at the Elder's bench and watched Commander Vance set the water down untouched. "This session has been called under emergency charter provisions," the session chair said. "Standing agenda as submitted. Ghost Grid Asset Recognition. Repository Casualty Record. Charter Amendment Review." He looked at the lower tier. "Commander Vance, you have the floor." Vance turned the document over. The top page was a registry form. Simple layout, plain text. At the top, Frontier Repository, Personnel Record, Permanent Entry. Below that, names. 3,247 of them listed in columns, the typeface small enough that the full list fit across the pages that followed. Researchers, engineers, archivists, support staff. Some of them with designations beside their names: Senior Computational Engineer, Materials Science Fellow, Quantum Relay Technician, and some with nothing beside them at all except a date. The date was the same for all of them. Vance set his tally counter on the table beside the document. He did not click it. "These are the people who were on the repository platform when it was destroyed," he said. "Some of them had been there for 20 years. Some of them arrived the week before." He did not look at Thuljan. He looked at the session chair. The council voted their workplace into the category of abandoned commercial property. I'd like the record to reflect who was inside it. The session chair looked at the document. He looked at the gallery. No one spoke. "So noted," he said. "The personnel record is entered into the permanent council registry." Thuljan's voice, when it came, was quieter than Valeshore had ever heard it. "The legal basis for the acquisition was sound," he said. "The third charter provisions were correctly applied. The installation met every criterion." Vance looked at him for the first time since entering the room. "Your database is immaculate, Exarch," Vance said. "It was simply written for an adversary that changed its skin 20 winters ago." Thuljan's mandibles did not click. He looked at the tally counter on the table. "The ghost grid," he said. "How long?" 8 years of active construction," Vance said. "The relay integration began before that. The design work before that." He paused. "We started the day the first Frontier installation was flagged for a commercial viability review. We read the charter provisions you cited this morning. We read them 10 years ago." A sound moved through the gallery, not a murmur, something more physical, the sound of a large body of beings absorbing information that changed the shape of everything they thought they already knew. Thuljan said, "The data core was accurate," Vance said. "The registered numbers were accurate. What was registered was not everything." He picked up the paper document and squared the edges against the table's surface, a small, precise motion. "We didn't spend 3 generations refining our alloys to ask your corporate board for a signature on our survival. The charter amendment took 40 minutes to draft and an hour to ratify." The language was not complicated. Valeshore had spent part of the night sketching the framework and spent the session watching it sharpen under the hands of 6 delegations who had, in the past 2 hours, recalculated exactly where they stood. The amendment established 3 things. First, no research installation, occupied or unoccupied, registered or unregistered under any commercial category, could be classified as recoverable Frontier property under any charter provision while personnel records showed active human presence within the past decade. Second, any Frontier asset acquisition contested by the originating species required a unanimous council vote, not a simple majority. Third, the Iron Spire hegemony's voting rights on Frontier development motions were suspended for a period the charter designated as pending structural compliance review, a designation that had been used exactly twice in council history, both times for civilizations that had subsequently spent decades in procedural remediation. Thuljan listened to the third provision, read into the record. His mandibles clicked once, then stopped. He did not contest the vote. The final tally, 14 in favor, 1 abstention. The abstention was Thuljan's, filed by his administrative aide because the Exarch had not raised his designation flag. Valeshore watched the vote finalize on the central pillar and thought about the iron washer. He had not seen it until the session. Vance had set it on the table when he removed the document case, placed it at the near corner, unpolished. the zinc coat worn at one edge, sitting on the smooth surface of the council table like something that had no business being there and was exactly where it needed to be. After the vote, when the session chair was entering the amendment language into the permanent record, Vance picked the washer up and held it for a moment. Then he set it on top of the document case. Valeshore thought about the first time he had seen it through the gallery camera feed on the Ashford. In the operations bay footage the council had since reviewed as part of the Ghost Grid documentation. Vance at the console, cross-referencing transit schedules, the washer catching the light. He had not understood it then, he understood it now. The washer had come from the repository, from the foundation bolts, the kind of hardware that held a structure together at the level no one inspected, no one cataloged, no one thought to classify as an asset worth protecting. The thing that bore the weight without getting the credit. Vance had carried it through 19 days of silence and one council session, and an operation that had disabled 42 warships without a single hull breach. He had not explained it to anyone. He did not explain it now. After the session, in the corridor outside the amphitheater, Valeshore found Vance walking alone toward the transit bay. "Commander," he said. Vance stopped. Valeshore searched for the right thing to say and found that there was not one, not a single sentence that covered the distance between what had been done to the repository and what had been done in response, and the 19 days between them, and the 3,247 names now in the permanent record. He had spent 30 years in this building learning the language of diplomatic precision, and none of it reached far enough. "The text is updated, Exarch," he said instead, not to Thuljan, who was not present, but because the words needed to be said in the corridor where the council could still hear the echo of them. "Ensure your engineers archive the prompt, so your children do not mistake a pause for an exit." Vance looked at him. Something in the expression shifted, not warmth, not relief, recognition, the look of a person hearing something said correctly. He nodded once. Then he walked to the transit bay. The Sentinel fleet began its withdrawal from the Aegis Gate anchorage at 1340. Not a retreat, a departure, ordered, sequenced, the 23,000 hulls pulling back from the outer perimeter in the same formation they had held for 37 hours. Valeshore watched the sensor display from the archive room, alone. The numbers on the display decreased in clean columns as each wing cleared the perimeter and moved into the deep void transit corridor. The hegemony anchorage fleet remained in place. Not by choice. The authentication keys would be restored in 48 hours, under the Charter's remediation provisions, once the compliance filings were submitted. Until then, 42 warships sat in the anchorage and waited, fully crewed, fully operational, incapable of moving anywhere. By 1500, the display showed the outer perimeter empty. The mass displacement readings were gone. The Voidwell sector read as it always had, clear, cold, nothing registered. As if the Ghost Grid had never been there at all. Except now it was in the permanent registry, every hull logged, every relay documented, every engineer's name in the record beside the installation they had built in the dark across 8 years of 3-shift days in unmapped asteroid pockets. It was there now. It would stay there. The thing that had been invisible by design was visible by choice, and that distinction was not small. Valeshore closed the sensor display. He opened his notes to the last page and looked at the final line he had written. "They are already there." He read it once, then he closed the notebook. In the permanent council record, under the date of this session, 2 entries now sat beside each other on the same page. The first was the original acquisition vote, 11 in favor, 3 against. Frontier Repository classified as recoverable commercial property under 3rd Charter provisions. The second was the amendment, 14 in favor, 1 abstention, 3rd Charter provisions restricted, unanimous threshold required. Hegemony voting rights suspended pending compliance. Between the two entries, a space of 11 days. The repository personnel record, 3,247 names, was filed as a permanent annex to both. Cross-referenced. Undeletable. The annex had been submitted on paper, which meant it had been scanned into the registry by hand. The scanned file showed the original document's edge, where the paper had been folded along the center crease at some point and then unfolded again. The fold was not in the center. It was slightly off, a manual press, the kind a person made when they were carrying a document in a jacket pocket and not thinking about it. Grand Exarch Thuljan filed his preliminary compliance report with the Council Secretariat at 1712. He filed it himself, without his administrative aid. The report was 3 pages. The language met every procedural requirement. It contained no objection language, no appeal basis, no reservation clause. His corporate board would receive their copy in the morning. Thuljan did not think about what they would say. He thought about the data core, sitting on the side table in his meeting room. He thought about the production figures, clean, declining, precise, and the 8 years of mass displacement shadows that had been in the Uit corridor the entire time, readable if you had the right archive and the patience to look. He had had access to the same archival data Veilshore had used. He had not looked. He filed the report and sat in the empty meeting room for a long time. The crystalline serving piece was still on the side table. He had set it down at the start of the meeting with Veilshore 12 days ago and not moved it since. He looked at it. He thought about what it meant that a council elder had come to him with a hand-drawn chart and asked for 48 hours, and he had told that elder he was reading ghosts into static. He had been reading a data core built by the people he was dismissing. He picked up the serving piece and set it in the storage compartment under the table. Then he left the room. In the Uit corridor, where the ghost grid's relay junctions ran their quiet signals through sublight fiber lines woven into the fabric of the outer rim, one of the maintenance teams was already at work. They had launched the day the session ended. Not to dismantle, to expand. The relay manifest included 41 new junction coordinates, filed with the Council Registry under the Ghost Grid Asset Record. The maintenance teams were seeding the outer extensions, the next layer of the network, built into corridors that ran beyond the current frontier boundaries, into regions the Council's charts still listed as uncharted space. They were already there. The alabaster amphitheater was empty by 1800. The crystalline walls still caught the light from the red star below and sent long prismatic lines across the tiered seating. The central pillars held the day's record, both entries, the annex, the amendment language, the Ghost Grid manifest. The permanent display would cycle through it on the overnight rotation, the way it cycled through all significant session records. At the center of the lower tier, where Commander Vance had stood at 9:03 with a document case and a half cup of untouched water, the table's surface was clean. The iron washer was gone. He had taken it with him. The tally counter was gone too. What remained was the water carafe, still half full, and the faint rectangular mark on the table's surface where the document case had sat. The paper document itself was in the permanent archive now, scanned and filed and cross-referenced to 2 council votes separated by 11 days. 3,247 names, in a building that had voted to call their workplace abandoned. In the permanent record beside each name, a single designation had been entered by hand before the scan, counted. Outside, in the deep void beyond the outer perimeter, the last of the Sentinel fleet's hull signatures cleared the long-range sensors and disappeared into the dark. The sensor display returned its reading, empty, clear, nothing registered. The corridor between the frontier and the council station held only what it had always held, cold vacuum, the light of a red star bending slowly around a distant rim, and the silence of a species that had gone back to work.